Poker's legendary champions, next generation stars, and tireless ambassadors of the game, sharing their wisdom and guiding your journey to high achievement on the green felt. This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson.
Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson. And today's guest on CPG is a run-at-once elite coach who is simply one of the best overall poker players on the face of the planet, Kevin Rabichow. KRab has been fully immersed in the world of heads-up, no-limit hold'em cash games for well over a decade, all the while building a reputation as one of the best and most highly sought-after private coaches in the business. As a matter of fact, here's what Greatness Village's own Coach Thomas thinks of Mr. Rabichow. Quote, "I could ogle Kevin Rabichow all day long. He is legitimately a god among men," end quote. That's almost enough to make a longtime poker coach jealous, but I can't wait for Terminator Thomas to fully get his voice back. In today's conversation with Kevin Rabichow, you're going to learn all about his recent victory in the Run-At-Once Legends Showdown event, where he took down a who's who of poker behemoths, including past CPG guest Fedor Holz, why transitioning to MTTs sometimes annoys even Mr. Kevin Rabichow, KRab's thoughts on studying even when you don't feel like it, and much, much more. And before you dive into this conversation with one Kevin Rabichow, if you haven't checked out greatnessvillage.com yet, go do so. Sign up to the email newsletter. You'll be sent a link that will plug you in to a high-level community of people who are passionate about improving their poker game on a daily basis. One more time, that's greatnessvillage.com. And now, without any further ado, I bring to you one of the best and brightest stars in the whole world of poker, Kevin Rabichow. What is up, Mr. Rabichow? Welcome back to Chasing Poker Greatness, sir. How you been?
Thanks, Brad. I'm good. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. Excited to have you back. The last time we spoke, if my memory serves me correctly, you were about to embark on a heads-up challenge at Run-At-Once. So why don't you tell the listener how that went?
Yeah, I guess it's been a little while. That went very well. I won.
You
so that
it.
Was
How did that feel?
Scooped it. Yeah, that was cool. That was like, so I guess a little background. The format was, we had like 6 pretty high skill heads up no limit players. We played like a series of matches, sort of like it wasn't exactly winner take all, but we just played like a league, so to speak, on Run-At-Once poker, 50, 100 stakes. And yeah, I felt like I was really prepared. I felt like I was playing well. And then I just got hit with the deck too. I was super lucky pretty much in every match. I think especially against my friend Bjorn, but also like in the finals against Pauly. I believe like with 100 hands left, I was down 3 buy-ins and got it all in as like a 90-10 dog and got there. And so that was nice. Yeah. So that kind of propelled me towards, I guess the literal and figurative crown. But yeah, we shipped it. That was cool.
Congrats, man. You had 5 top flight professionals and then Fedor Holz. He's the fish of the group. No.
Fedor played, I mean, that's funny. That was like sort of how it was like not marketed, but like that was the perception. And I mean, he was like, he's tough. I mean, and then I don't know if anyone watched the more recent like GG match that he played against Limitless a bit. Like, I mean, everyone makes mistakes, but like for someone who never specialized in heads up and someone who's just like kind of taking a shot in the dark, like he plays really well.
I mean, it's Fedor Holz.
Yeah.
What do people
Like,
expect? Like,
you're not just like reeling in a live one here. Like, this is someone who's going to like understand what you're going for, like understand the mechanics and just like try to be good, like try to be a pain in the ass. And that's exactly what he did for the most part. That was my worst session, I think, was against Fedor. And that I got smashed in that one. 4 or 5 buy-ins.
yeah, I mean, a killer is a killer. And when you've been in poker, you understand the theory. You're as smart as Fedor Holz. Like, my assumption is whatever game he tries to play, he's going to get really good at it really, really fast. Like, to the top, like, 0.1%. Now, is he going to be like world class heads up PLO and be able to battle like the specialist? Probably not, unless he devoted like years to it, in which case my money's on Fedor. I think in any poker format, my money's on Fedor if he spends a lot of time thinking about it.
Yeah.
All right. So what else have you been up to outside of the heads up challenge that you took down?
Yeah. So I guess probably 2 main things that have taken up most of my focus since then. Like for my own play, I've been focusing on tournaments online. So that probably would have led, like the end of that heads up challenge would have led pretty much straight into like W Coop time of year. And then like over the winter there's just been a lot of online tournaments, throughout
I've heard
pandemic times, right? I mean, that's kind of been the norm. So yeah, for my own play, I devoted a lot of energy to that, to getting good at that, to trying to play like full schedules and sort of really be like, I say this as if I'm not a full-time poker player, which is like kind of true. But like really trying to dive in and be like a full-time tournament professional, which is hard, and it's presented its own challenges, but that's been a good chunk of my time. And then the other side is coaching. I just have some.
What's so hard about it? What's so hard about the full-time MTT pro?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that are hard. So I guess for me, the hardest thing in terms of preparation is like the complexity of the game means that I pretty much cannot be as accurate as I'm used to being in cash format. Like in heads up cash, for example, when I'm studying like serious details, right? Like there's a lot of variables that are constant in the cash game environment, which means that I can construct my ranges in a really accurate way. I can focus on good bet sizes at every single node with really high accuracy. And I can get into like the detailed heuristics of like how things work in a line that doesn't come up all that often. And in tournaments, like when I try, like my natural like state for studying is like trying to grasp at those details, but I'm just like getting pre-flop ranges wrong, and I'm like missing like range C bets at 20 big blinds deep. And it's just like, there's just so many. Well, I don't know if it's frustrating. It's just like, it's different. Like the way that I used to learn the game doesn't work in tournament format. And I need to spend way more time on like macro view, thinking about, okay, like I need to learn all the most common spots to a fairly proficient level before I can like engage the curiosity that I have about like the details of little spots, because there's just no edges there, right? So I'm sort of like coaching myself to be better at learning this new game, because I know this, like as a coach, I understand how people get bogged down in details, but like that used to work for me in the other game format, and it just doesn't work in tournaments, at least not yet. Like maybe 5 years from now, that's what I'll be studying, but it's not today.
Well, were you studying the like precise fine details when you first started playing poker?
Probably not. No.
Yeah, I mean, so why is this any different, right? Like it's like big concepts, and you've been doing one thing for like
it's been a long
time.
Yeah, so like for anyone who's not familiar with me, like I started learning Heads Up No Limit in 2010, and I basically continued to play it almost full time until like 2018. So for many, many years, I was building layers of strategy on the same format. So it was so it became natural to get into those details. But you're right, like it's no different from how I learned the game probably a decade ago, but I mean, that's a decade ago. It's been a while.
Yeah, it feels different. It feels like, how am I not doing these things that ought to be automatic? And I also get the frustration aspect of like not being able to dive into your curiosity and like the finer details of things where you can, find some edges that other people are missing. And that's exciting to me. Like that part of poker is like the part of poker that drives me. And then like like you said, the macro stuff of like, I don't have my preflop ranges memorized. Like that's just, it's just like a thing that you've got to do, but we don't really want to do it. We don't look forward to memorizing preflop ranges.
Yeah, like in April I played a full scoop schedule, and I had like notes to myself that every morning I'm supposed to go on to like the preflop range viewer, and I'm supposed to drill like I made note maybe the previous day or like at the end of the previous week, like, hey, these spots were giving me trouble, like I wasn't sure about my ranges in these spots. So I gave myself notes for the following week to like open that up pre-session. But then I'm also trying to like get a good night's sleep, and I'm trying to, do yoga, and I'm trying to eat clean or maybe like fast through the day. And it was all these like little things that I didn't like. My curious brain was like, oh, I don't want to do this. And I kind of just had to like, I think I developed like some, or maybe like one or two good habits. And ideally I would have like 6 or 7 of them. So yeah, I'll apply my discipline gradually, I guess. And maybe 3 or 4 scoops from now, I'll have all that stuff in a row.
You just got to get one of your friends who's also getting into tournaments and just have an accountability, show up at this time. We're going to quiz each other back and forth. And then like yoga doesn't matter. You have to show up for your friend. That's like a huge driver, that social accountability.
Yeah.
I'm the same way though. Like if something's like, I'm like, I should do this, but there's so many other things that are much more fun, or that I feel like are also
like they're all important.
Equally important, right?
Yeah, that's what makes it hard, is they're all important, right? But I think, like I suggested before, like if I was coaching myself, which I guess I kind of am, I would tell myself like, hey, your baseline is to like lean into these tasks and ignore those other ones, and those other ones are actually higher priority. Like these are the types of mistakes you're making sort of at the table, like too often. Not that like these aren't. I'm making it sound like I'm just like pre-flop,
just giving it away. Yeah,
I just have I have some inaccuracies that I wouldn't have if I was playing tournaments for the last 5 years, right? So I'm trying to like fast track those parts where I just get like the very the common important spots. Just they become automatic, and they're almost automatic, but they're not quite there.
Yeah, it's like, oftentimes I think the thing that we procrastinate doing over and over and over again is like the thing that most needs to be done. Yeah. And we know that like in our heart, but for some reason we still just keep procrastinating. And it happens to me all the time. Like I have things that I'm like, I need to do this. I need to like really dive deep into like paid marketing. And I find myself not doing that, just over and over, and it's like, okay, like something's got to give eventually. Yeah. And then whenever I do something that I've procrastinated forever, it's like it feels so good. It's like a weight off your shoulders, that's been subconsciously dragging you down.
Yeah, I feel that.
So here's a question that I've come up with. Imagine there's a greatest hits collection for the best stories that you've accumulated in your career, traveling around or sitting at home playing cards. Tell me a story that's on that greatest hits album. Doesn't have to be like a poker hand. It could be travel story, degenning it up, whatever.
Yeah. You ask about a travel story. Like my mind goes to probably like one of the more ambitious poker related trips, or maybe just the most fun. I'm not sure, but I guess this would have been like in the middle of my heads up cash career. I think it was the summer of 2014. Yeah, like late 2014. So I had been living in Toronto for a couple of years already, but I didn't have like status in Canada. I was still sort of border hopping every 3 to 6 months and traveling and resetting my visa in that way. So I had a friend, Tom, another heads up player, and we made plans to relocate like outside of Canada for an extended period of time. We wanted to go to Asia, or we wanted to go to New Zealand, Australia. So we just kind of did. Yeah. It was like, I've done this with a lot of poker trips where it's like, oh, there's a tournament stop in Macau, or there's a tournament stop, like there's the Aussie Millions, and we'll go play, and it'll be like a working vacation sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Usually those working vacations are just like vacations. And,
right, yeah.
And they're
not much work.
Yeah.
More vacation.
I find, especially the shorter ones, like if I go somewhere for a week or 2 weeks and there's like one tournament that I want to play, like let's be real, like it's a vacation, right? I've done that enough times where I know that work doesn't end up being the focus. I think the cool thing about this trip was the time frame was like 6 months. So because the time frame was like 6 months, we did work. I mean, we like established, we had like a home office in Auckland for 3 months. We had like a home office in Sydney for 3 months. But I don't remember so the work part, I guess, made it viable financially to like just be on the road for 6 or 7 months. But like, it wasn't so much the tournament stops, like the Aussie Millions or whatever, like that part at the time was not really the work for me. But that was really cool. Like that, I just, found myself in a completely different place for a long time. And because we had like a permanent setup while we were there, we were able to take like a dedicated vacation in the middle of that. We had a few other friends like fly out in January to meet us, and we rented an RV and just like drove New Zealand for 4 weeks. And that was just like the most incredible trip, which would not have been made possible had we not essentially like funded it by just like showing up and working for 2 months straight, out of an Airbnb. Well, what probably wasn't Airbnb at the time, but working out of Auckland. And then like
2014, Airbnb's been around for 6 years, hasn't it?
I'm not sure. I want to say I would have rented on like, I feel like that was like the Verbo years, like the, I don't remember how we booked it, but it might have been Airbnb, at least the second one that we rented. But yeah, just, I mean, incredible trip, like completely funded by poker and like sort of encouraged by poker. I could tell like the degen stories and like the sort of like, I don't know, recklessness was not really like I don't know, that's usually not my story. Although some of the friends that we had on that trip were like, could not resist gambling the entire, I don't know if you've been on many like long poker vacations, but like people they just gamble on everything. Like it's never really been like I don't get that much energy or like excitement out of it. But I had friends who were just like, they're gambling for 5-6 figures for some reason, like in the back of a van while I'm driving through like, literally the Lord of the Rings landscape or something. Like, yeah, like you really don't want to miss this. And it's like, okay, hold on, like one more game of Big Two or something. Like come on. But yeah, that's just an overall incredible trip. It's the one that I remember most fondly, I would say.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And like, I've noticed this too, that like you plan to work, have a working vacation. Why do you think the work never really manifests?
I mean, because I think that's not really why you wanted to be there in the first place, right? I mean, the whole appeal of the working vacation is the vacation. Like like I didn't go there to just like find a new, 4-walled room to put my laptop in and study. The appeal is like to get outside and take in culture and, I don't know, experience new things. Yeah. So I do think that the longer time frame though makes it like this is even what I've sort of landed on for like playing live tournaments as close as like in the US. When I traveled to the US in early 2020, I was making a point to like just stay places longer. Like those 2-day trips or those 3-day trips to play one tournament, it was just, I would both hate it and it would also not be that financially beneficial to schedule it so tight, because it's like flights in both directions, hotels.
It's hard to outrun that.
To play one tournament, right?
Yeah.
Or like to play 2 tournaments. I was finding that like a longer stay, like going to Florida in January and staying 3 weeks and playing cash every day and playing 8 tournaments or 10 tournaments or something and there's still time to like go out in Miami, and there's still time to go to the beach, and there's like that longer time horizon, I think is something I've learned makes the working vacation actually like functional on both sides.
Yeah, I've taken, I can't count how many like week-long trips, and I'm like, I'm going to do some work on the trip, and then, or I'm going to read this book that I've been meaning to read that's like not fiction. It's like a self-improvement, performance, all that stuff. And I never open it. I never open my laptop. I never do any of the things that I planned on doing. And like you said, the reality is like you're on vacation for a reason, to get away from all that stuff so that you can like rest actively and then come back recharged, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So when you were coming up in your poker career, when you first decided to make the jump, who's the biggest influence into you becoming a poker professional?
I mean, it's hard to nail down one person, to be honest. I can think of like a couple major influences. I would say, like, I mean, when I was quite a bit younger, like when I was still in high school or like early in college, I think it was just like my close friends or my roommates, like my friend Dan in high school, or like my roommate Henry in college. Like these guys, I guess because they were also kind of in it and doing it, they just kind of gave me that like reinforcement and confidence that said like, oh, this is viable, right? Like this isn't just me alone, like trying some fringe game that probably isn't going to work out. Like there's other humans that are doing the exact same thing, and we're all seemingly intelligent. So like there's got to be something here. So I think that was like early reinforcement that made me confident about that. And that continued to build like as my network started to build. I mean, I guess the other thing is just like my parents not like slamming the door and saying like, hell no, you can't do that. Like that surprisingly, they were like surprisingly on board, I guess is what I'll say. For like in the middle of university, I just like took a quarter off and went to Vegas, and they were just like, okay. And then like at the end of university, I didn't apply for jobs, and I was just like, hey, I'm going to move to Toronto and play poker. And they're just like, okay. Like at no point was there just like a hard, like, are you thinking about this properly? There was just like that implicit trust. And I want to give that a lot of credit, because I didn't have like that one, I didn't have like a key coach or like a mentor that like brought me through the ranks or anything. I had sort of like more of a wider network. And I think I've talked before about how important they were to me, just accelerating growth and being around people in a learning environment. That was huge. But not like one specific person, right? I mean, I can name 15 or 20 people who were all really key for that.
I mean, parents are wiser than we give them credit for, especially when we're like 20 years old, right? Like I think that they kind of see what's going on, and they're like, okay, this is an opportunity for Kevin to take a quarter off and go have an experience and then come back. Yeah. And like, he may not get that opportunity in the future. And like, he's young. So young people are allowed to take more risks in the world because, quite frankly, they have less to lose.
Not everyone sees it that way, though. Like, not every, I had a lot of friends who just like committed down a path like super early. I mean, I was at competitive school, so like a lot of doctor friends, right? And like when if they're, I mean, a lot of them are doctors now, but if they're doctors now, that means like 15 years ago, they decided like firm, like, yeah, I'm just going to be a doctor. That's my life. Which is pretty, like, to me, it's like pretty scary to not really have that option to pivot.
It's insane to me. It feels like terrifying.
Yeah.
Because like, what if you make it and you're like, hate it? Yeah. And you're like, oh, you're just stuck. You're stuck in the golden cage probably forever.
Yeah. I do think that there's like, I think this is sort of just like the internet gig era, right? Like even doctors are finding ways to like kind of move out of the traditional path and like kind of do their own thing. I'm sure like, there's lawyers and whatever other like long-term career path doing the same thing. But it is way easier in our industry, obviously, because we never really committed firmly to like something in particular.
Yeah.
We gave ourselves maximum flexibility there.
Right. Loose commitments all around.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people that I know, friends, acquaintances that became teachers that went to school to become a teacher that hated it and quit before one semester was finished.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the sort of assembly line and teaching people to pass standardized tests type situation is like not real learning. It's not engaging curiosity or creativity. And like when you realize, oh, I'm not really doing very much, they could just put automated videos in front of all the kids and be like, okay, here's what you do. Why do we even need teachers if they're just going to be like little robots?
Yeah. Did any of them end up like moving into like online learning or some other kind of like learning project?
Not to my knowledge. They kind of were just over the whole teaching experience, and they were like, yeah, we can't, it's not about like personal relationships. It's not about like genuinely helping these kids. It's not about coaching up their strengths. And they were just like, I don't like it. It's not what I signed up for. It's not what I'm passionate about. And so they just quit. Which is pretty reasonable to me, to be honest. All right. So what would you say is your poker superpower?
Superpower. I mean, something I've always found come easy or easy-ish to me is you hear a lot about someone saying that they like got inside of their opponent's head. I do feel, because I've sort of been like entrenched in learning and kind of collaborating with other people on the learning process, I think I have a very strong insight into how people do think, like how they think about their strategy. And that whole, I mean, it does sound cheesy to say that you're like inside of your opponent's head, but I often find myself sort of like simulating my opponent's like strategic thought. And as a result, like, I mean, that is literally what I'm describing, I guess, is like being inside of their head. That's come fairly natural to me. So I think I would describe that more as a superpower than like something else that's more of a learned skill. That's something I use a lot, actually.
I think that it is kind of a learned skill, in that, like, you mentioned before how you layer strategies on top of each other and you've nailed down the precision. Well, like when you encounter somebody, basically what you're doing is you're constructing their strategies, and you're constructing their strategies mentally, and then you're trying to find the holes and find the places where you can find an edge, right? And like you find somebody that's like on a layer that's 3 above you that you've experienced and you understand because you've studied it, then it's like, okay, like I can map out what this player's thinking or what they're doing, how they're constructing their strategies, and then really finding the edges. And I've said it before, but a lot of the edge in poker is like knowing your opponent's strategies better than they know them themselves. Especially like as it relates to lower level players, like they don't really know what they're doing, but a higher level player knows what they're doing, how they're constructing their strategies, where the holes are, and then they target those strategies very specifically. So like, that makes a ton of sense to me. Like being in somebody's head, it's more like you know how they're playing the game, and because you know how they're playing the game, you know all the perfect counters.
I mean, I think it's also like it's a bit of empathy too, because I can see a player at like whatever stage they're at, like whatever level they're at. And I can think back and think like, oh yeah, I used to play like this and it caused these problems, right? Like, oh, I used to have this like upfront aggressive strategy that wasn't protecting my check range, and here's how it went wrong, and here's all the things that I fixed, and now I know the counter. So that's like, it is kind of what you're saying. Like it's a matter of having like broken down that flawed strategy at some point earlier in my career, and then recognized that like they're still sitting in that a little bit, or maybe part of their game is still at that place. So I already know what's wrong with that strategy.
And I think one thing you mentioned empathy, because I think that is very important part of this equation. Something that's kind of odd that has happened to me, like too many times to count, is like sometimes you just get a sense that somebody's about to do something ridiculous. And I don't know where that sense comes from. They could have not played a hand for 2 hours straight, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, they're about to go off. Like, I don't know why I sense that.
I get that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't describe it really. but it's like, I know that they're about to just go off like a rocket for some reason. And then they just do. And it's like it's very bizarre.
It's funny how much of like human nature is just like scripted, right? Like there's everyone who plays poker or any competitive game, like they're driven by the same sort of motivations. They experience the same emotions. Yeah, and I think just when you've been in it for so long and you've seen kind of that happen, like you've seen someone go off the rails and you know like what it looks like and you know why it happens and what triggers it, like it's intuition now, right? Like you're just kind of reminded, because I experience this all the time. I mean, more accurately in a heads up environment for sure, but that's just because I have more repetitions there, I guess.
Yeah.
But you can just tell, you can just feel like someone's emotional state, like if they're fed up, if they've been unlucky in a certain way to the point where it's going to cause them to do something. Maybe the signs were there in the way they played other hands. Like they showed small little, trigger
cracks.
Warnings sort of. Yeah, the cracks are forming, like little mistakes lead to bigger ones. Yeah, it's all just the
delays.
Same script.
Yeah, a little bit longer delays. Like their posture changes, their facial expression is a little bit different, and you're like, something's brewing over there. Yeah, that's really cool, and it's I think that like you said, it's reps and scripted. I love that. That's a greatness bomb. That like it's like a script in a movie that's playing over and over and over again. Plus, I mean, when I was like in the first probably 4 or 5 years of my own poker career, I think that I started to gain an awareness when I was about to go off like a rocket, because that was a thing that like would regularly happen. I would leave the tables and like walk back to my hotel room or whatever, just like scratching my head, like, why did I do that again? Like again, like what is wrong with me?
Right.
So yeah, I guess that's part of it too, is like, I've been through it. I know what it feels like. I know what it looks like. And then so I can spot it. So this is a question that doesn't have to be taken literally. When you think of Nemesis in your poker career, who's the first person that comes to mind? And what I mean by that is like, just somebody that just gets the better of you, like over and over and over again. And it could just be like, obviously the deck hits them in the head every single time they're playing against you.
Yeah, there was a name that came to mind, but I think more. So, when you say Nemesis, I'm thinking heads up battles, obviously. I think perhaps like more impactful on my career that I remember like was this like anonymous opponent that I played many years ago. I assume it was one opponent. I mean, it could have been multiple people, but I used to play on a network called Microgaming. I think they're still around. I'm not really sure. And they were more like it was like a European market. So I guess early in my time playing from Canada, some of the sites were still more of like a North American focused market, and other ones like Microgame were more of like the European market. So I was playing against, I want to say it was like 2-4 and 3-6 Euro stakes. And this was at the time, like not even, I think it was probably like a below average limit for me. It was like, I was probably playing average buy-in 1K, and this was on, and I was playing like 2-4 and 3-6 on this site. And I got ran over by this like same anonymous player over a stretch of like 10 or 15 or 20,000 hands for like 20K or 25K or something like that. So like a lot of buy-ins, like 30 or 40 buy-ins. And I don't know who it was, and I don't think I ever played them on a different network. And like that sort of ate away at me, I think.
Yeah,
just like
I could see that. Some dude just comes out of the dark and smashes you, and you never see him again.
Well, and it's just like the psychological impact of this too, right? Like I think at that point, I mean, the reason I bring this up is because I think it touches on like sort of the mental game difficulty I've had a lot, which is sort of like entitlement, because this player in my mind was like definitively worse than me. because they played on like a softer site. They played lower stakes, and I didn't know who they were. Like I didn't have like a name to attach to them to justify. It's not like I like dug through and I found out like, oh, they're, you know, they're staked by Doug Polk or something. Like, oh, of course. Like,
it's Cole South messing around.
Yeah. There was no connection that like eased that tension that told me like, oh, it's okay. They're better than you. So in my mind, it was like this battle of they are bad and I should be winning and I'm getting crushed. And that was hard for me. So that sticks in my mind a lot. And I guess like the takeaway there, I mean, fast forward a few years, I think they were just playing a style that I wasn't good against. I think that's like the reality of it. I don't know if I was losing. I don't know if I was like breaking even, whatever, like, you know, losing 30 buy-ins, it happens obviously due to variance, but I do think that they were playing a style that happened to match up really, really well against my weaknesses at that time. And as a result, like, yeah, and it just took me like forever to recognize that as a mistake, because I think I was clouded, like my judgment was sort of clouded in this way that was like, they are definitively worse than me. Like I know it, I can guarantee it. And I just was wrong. Like I could not guarantee that.
I think, can we call it not entitlement tilt and just like either arrogance or hubris? It's like, and I think it's very common, especially for like high level poker players, to be like, no, I dismissed this out of hand without even investigating it because I am superior to you, point blank. And I think that like the folks really, like you said, when you open up the possibility that maybe you have a weakness in your game and they're just exploiting that weakness, or their style matches up really well against you, then you're able to resolve those weaknesses and be a much stronger poker player. So like, we poker players just, and I guess we kind of have to have a lot of self-confidence and self-belief to, you know, suit up and lose 30 buy-ins and be like, yeah, we're going to keep going. This is okay. Like we still got things figured out. But I think that like the earlier that, you know, the listener in the audience opens themselves up to the possibility that maybe you're just not playing as well as you think you are, and maybe you still have a lot of room to grow, then you open yourself up for that growth to become a stronger, more competent, better poker player.
And I think this was like perhaps even easier for me to spot because it was heads up, because in heads up, you do encounter like a wide variety of opponents. And there's no other way to make money other than to like dissect their strategy and beat it, right? Like there's no, if you play in like an 8-handed game in Vegas and one player is unusual to you and like one player at the table, you know, matches up well against you and gets the best of you, it might just not even matter. Like you might just be doing fine against the other 6 and you just never notice it and it never like tips you off, right? So I think I was lucky in that sense. Like my requirement to adapt was like there was more pressure on that, and it was like kind of faster moving. I mean, this was, you know, it probably took me 2 or 3 years even to realize my mistakes, but I could easily see that just going like a lifetime without being noticed if it was in a different game environment.
Yeah, you say that, it's very funny because one struggle that I have, so I've made a bunch of courses that specifically target fish using mass data analysis and looking at the holes in their game to massively exploit them. And what's funny is like the people that I have that are the hardest to sell to are the high level players that would benefit the most from the material, because in their minds, oh, they're weak players, I already beat them, right? But they don't follow that question up with, could I beat them for more? Am I maximizing value here against these very specific players? And so like it just strikes me as like hilarious that I've made these courses that are like, for somebody that's playing, you know, 1K and L are nothing. And people are like, nah, I don't even want to look at it. I don't care. I don't want to check it out. I'm like, okay. One specific dude in the group, I badgered him. Like, I badgered him because we're close. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, just here, it's $400. Just buy it. Check it out. See what happens. Like, you play 2K and L. What's the worst that fucking happens? Like, you understand pot odds, right? Like, this is a pot odds situation here. He bought it. I checked in on him like 3 hours later. He's like, oh, it's already paid for itself. Like 4 days later, he's like, oh, this is the most valuable, highest ROI thing that I've bought since Pio Solver. And I'm like, man, I told you. But like it took everything in me. Like, and he's close to me. So like I felt comfortable badgering him. But most people are like, yeah, no, I do well. I don't care. I don't want to look at it. And it just I'm dumbfounded by that. But I think ultimately it just boils down to like arrogance and hubris of like, yeah, I'm really good at playing against these guys. You know, there was like he told me that there's a run at once video where somebody used sizings that I know are inefficient. And they're like, fish is inflexible with their continuing range. Like 6 times in a row, the fish just folds the river. It's like, how many times do they need to fold in a row to realize that maybe they're not inflexible with their river calling range? Anyway, that's just like a thing that I've been dealing with personally that I think is like, it's just really a hilarious problem to have. But it stems
very
back
common.
to, it is.
Like I run across like a lot of my students will not view a amateur opponent or a fish opponent as like a thinking strategic like as an opportunity to build a strategy that exploits them. They just think like, oh yeah, like they're bad, so the money just arrives in my account.
Right.
And
like
it's just not true.
They're the easiest ones. Like, of course you win, right? It's not about winning because of course you win. It's about winning the max. And that's what people miss. But yeah, it's like, of course they're thinking human beings and like they all act shockingly similar. And they're not in like a fish chat room somewhere developing their strategies together. Right. So like, this is just like really instinctual human beings, how they perform when they're in an environment that they're not used to. Right. So anyway, that's I just think that like arrogance, hubris, all these things really hold people back from realizing their full potential. And like you said, thankfully, you were a strong player that was still making a living and still beating the game. But like, if you weren't, and you weren't able to look in the mirror, your poker career's done. We're not having this conversation right now.
It's true.
The decision to enter a hand is fundamental to poker strategy. Too tight, and they know what you have. Too loose, and you're easy to run over. Preflop Bootcamp from Chasing Poker Greatness is a comprehensive guide to locking down your preflop game and creating true range advantage. 8 days of guided training, over 60 optimal ranges, and access to a dedicated community of players that will push your preflop game from a place of weakness to your greatest strength. Go to chasingpokergreatness.com/bootcamp. Available now.
Before boot camp, I had been playing for maybe 15 years, somewhat seriously, always trying to get better, jumping from learning program to different learning programs and training site to training site. Kind of feeling a little bit lost, not really knowing how to go about getting better. And Preflop boot camp just felt like a great starting point, a way for me to move from being a losing player to possibly a winning player. It felt like the right first step.
Once you jumped in boot camp, what was your experience like?
Well, first off, I realized that I'd been making a lot of mistakes prior to boot camp, kind of learning what ranges should look like and what hands should be played in what situations. It was exciting because I could see what other people had been doing to me, what I had been missing in my game. And then from there, just the whole camaraderie of everybody that's signed up, working together, trying to achieve that goal. That was fun. That's pushing each other and really helping one another, kind of feeling like you're a part of a team. It was a great experience. I enjoyed the process and I learned a lot.
What was your experience like playing cards post boot camp?
It's a totally different experience. It put me in a position to be successful as opposed to always being behind the 8 ball and playing catch up. I really feel like it's the foundation of a solid poker game. And since boot camp, I've been able to turn a profit and keep building on what I learned there being able to go back into the group and really work together even after boot camp was over, it's been awesome.
What's your sample size of winning post boot camp?
I think I have 70,000 hands played by now. I'm a father and I have a job, so I'm not a professional player by any means. That's my sample size.
Preflop Bootcamp is the flagship Chasing Poker Greatness training program. If you'd like to dramatically upgrade your preflop game, a new bootcamp launches on the last Saturday of every single month, and your link to join is chasingpokergreatness.com/bootcamp. One more time, that's chasingpokergreatness.com/bootcamp, all one word, or you can click through in the description box of this episode. Okay, back to my questions. When you think about favorite sessions ever, what's the first one that comes to mind?
So there was one. I mean, this is gonna sound shitty because this is like the type of online session that was like, it's like folklore at this point because it never happens anymore. But there was a session. It was actually on that trip that I was describing earlier, when I was living out in New Zealand. And so the way that at the time when you played on Party Poker Heads Up, the way the lobby worked was there was a fixed number of tables that would ever exist. Not like the number that would display at a time, but like a lobby maximum. So if
you said 18, Party Poker?
Party Poker, yeah.
Oh yeah. I remember that from 2005. There were two 30-60 tables every day. I would wake up at 4 a.m, or maybe go to sleep at 4 a.m. I guess this is 2005. Put my name on the list. There's like 60 people on the list. And just hope to not oversleep it. Like hope to like wake up and be like 5th on the list. I mean, it's hilarious how they just had like static. Oh, we got 2 tables. Okay. Best of luck, guys.
It's like if you had to like phone in to the Vegas like poker room like before you boarded your flight to go to Vegas. Like,
right. Like
because if you were already there, you were too late to get a seat.
Yeah, I mean, it shows sort of like how preposterous it was because like you've got 60 people on the list. So like you can spread so many games and make so much more money. And for some reason you just don't. Okay.
I mean, I don't know if this was a literal like server space limitation. I don't know. Regardless of why they had it in place, there would never be more than 18 heads up tables. And one person could open 16 for themselves.
Yeah.
So like on the New Zealand time zone, like me and my friend Tom, who I was there with, like we were just the only 2 regs. Like we just like there were no other player. Well, I mean, other players would fight obviously for tables, but the idea was like the lobby was ours, because nobody else could sit unless they wanted to play us. So at one point in that trip, and I think it was around New Year's. I remember in those years, like the Christmas holiday to New Year's was just incredible action. And it was always my biggest winning month was December. So that particular New Year's, like this guy started sitting, one of us, it wasn't always the same, but this guy started joining who his entire strategy was to fold 0% before the river. He was always there on the flop. He was always there on the turn. And then he would like make his decision on the river essentially. And we realized this like pretty early on that he was just completely inflexible to sizing. So like there would be sessions where we would just like, I would take on a strategy of like limp, go to the flop. If I make top pair, bet 20x the pot. Like if I make any pair, really just bet 20x the pot. So like stacks are flying in these sessions. So every time this guy sits, stacks are flying. It was like the most fun because of like the strategy he was choosing. It was just like the most like just emotionally enjoyable sessions to play. Like, and I guess it was 510, which was like kind of average stake for me at the time. So it wasn't like stressful or anything, but like money would just fly during these sessions. And there was one session that he was stuck a lot, and it just got to the point where he just wanted to flip. And like, as a heads up player, like that was honestly it was good for business, I guess is what I'll say. So we just like got to the point where like we were just all in like every second hand for hours and hours. He, you know, at one point we played like a 20K pot at 510.
Because you're not like resetting stacks. So
no, it's just one table. Like we're just all the money's on the table. He just keeps me like he lose 1,000 snap reload, lose 1,000 snap reload. So it's just like the most action filled session.
Did you win the 20K flip?
I did. Yes. I won a lot from this player.
No shit.
more than you should in a 5-10 game.
Yeah. I can
imagine. The funniest part that I remember is that when this wasn't just on one day, by the way, this was like over the course of a week. He would like come back like day after day. We were like clearing our schedule. Like I forget his screen name, but you know, it was just like, oh yeah, like this, you know, these are the hours that this guy sits, like you have to play. He started chatting with me because I guess he was like, I don't know, like we're repeat customers here. Like we're now like sort of table mates. He was chatting with me and he starts saying like, hey, I think the software is rigged. 90, I've been tracking my all-ins. Like I've lost 16 out of 17 or something like this, like 92%. It's getting ridiculous. And then he later in the session, like, I guess I was giving good action. He says, thanks for the game. By the way, this other player, and I forget the screen name, but he's like, this other player I think is cheating. I think he's staked by the house. You should avoid him. And it was my roommate, Tom. We're the only two players. Like, it's obviously going to be one. He was like giving me tips. He was like, hey man, like be careful out here. Like this, you don't want to lose your money to this guy. So See,
that's your greatest hit story right there. That was it. That is freaking awesome. Did he I know this is like a dumb question, but I can't imagine him ever beating you in a session.
You know, I think he had a winning session. I think he had one. I mean, the way I described that one where he's just all in every second hand, it wasn't always like that, right? It was a bit like he's an action player, and it took time for me to recognize like what kind of things would be like the best, right? Like the best possible strategy. By the end, I mean, he was losing massively, but I'm sure there were a couple sessions early on where he left with 4 or 5K. It wasn't always leaving with nothing.
Yeah, I mean, to tie back into what we were talking about earlier, you need a time to map out what the hell this guy is doing, and then once you mapped it out, you're like, oh, okay, I see now. Let's just limp in 20x when.
I mean, it takes a while to get to the point where you're testing 20x flop C bets. Like it's not exactly in my like, you know, top 3 tips for like ways to exploit. Like it doesn't immediately come to mind. There was a lot of trial and error there.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't just like, oh, I'm just going to do this and it's going to win. No, you tried a bunch of different things and eventually landed on the 20x. So on the flip side of that, do you have any memories of a least favorite poker session?
You know, I've always been someone, I mean, I'm sure I can think of something, but just generally, like I've always been sort of like a quit your session early type of player. And I mean, maybe this is fortunate, or maybe this was just like a good mental game decision that I made early on, but like I have almost never like gone off for like 10, 15, 20 buy-ins. Like I really can't remember a single time.
Well, it doesn't have to be like losing. It could just be like a god awful trip that you took to some place.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, actually, yeah, something comes to mind. It was pretty recent, actually. I mean, the way that you said that reminded me of the Niagara poker room. And the last time that I played in Casino Niagara would have been like February 2020. We had probably like the biggest cash game that I've ever played there. And I just lost like basically every major pot that I got involved in, I lost. I remember looking back at my records recently because it was tax season in April. And and I just had like, I probably played like 10 cash sessions or something. And it was like 9 sessions where I lost a buy-in or greater, and like 1 session where I broke even or something like that. It was atrocious. That was not a good trip. And that was hard for a number of reasons, I guess. But I think the main reason is that like those games are very rare. Like there's a WPT at Fallsview every what time of year do they run that? I guess it would be every February.
What was the game? What was the stakes you were playing?
We were playing 100, 200 Canadian dollar, no limit. A lot of it was 50, 100 with a straddle. Some of it was 1-2, just straight 1-2. But probably the game we were starting most mornings, I guess, was 25-50, which then eventually we got a big enough crowd that there would be 2 tables and maybe one of them would put on the 100. But by the end of the week, like we had to move back to the Casino Niagara poker room, because when the WPT comes, we play in like the Falls View convention area downstairs. It's massive. There's like a ton of tables. But when the WPT is over, that rental finishes, then they move the cash games to the other casino, which is just like this dark room hidden behind all the slot machines next to like a sports bar or whatever. So there's like way fewer tables, but I guess at that point, like we were only in town for 1 or 2 more days, so they wanted to kick up the stakes. So we had 2 tables of 100, 200 for like 2 days straight, or maybe it was just one long day. Can't really remember. But yeah, I got whacked. It was not fun. I just remember it being like a very defeating session because, they were well above average games, and you just know that there's like an end date to it. I think that's like the frustrating thing is, like come Tuesday, everyone's going home and this game's just over. So there's this desire to like make the most of the session, and then I just get stacked again. And then like this is, you want to like run your account back up, and yeah, didn't happen. So that was a rough one.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal, especially when you have a limited time to play in the game. I know that I had Darren Elias on the show recently too, and he played. I can't remember. It was I don't think it was high stakes poker. It was some televised thing. I saw a little reel on Instagram where like he stacked Perkins, and we talked about it, and he's like, yeah, I gave it all back. He's like, I gave it all back. I got smashed. And he said basically pretty much verbatim what you just said of like, it's very rare that games that size run, and he typically has all of his own action when they run because he wants the opportunity. And if it doesn't work out, it can be fairly brutal. But I guess that's poker, right?
Yeah.
What would you consider a weakness that you have related to your poker game? And then what steps have you taken to overcome said weakness besides not studying MTT preflop charts?
Yeah. I mean, I'll see if I can think of something other than the sort of like entitlement discussion that we already had, because that is a big one. That's what I think about a lot.
What do you feel like? What goes through your mind when like you get smashed by somebody regularly and you're like, I'm better than them?
I mean, I think it's a bit of like, I don't know if I want to call it confusion, but like there's this disconnect, right? Like I get this sense of I guess I just want to say it's more like that feeling that you deserve to win. And when you're losing, there's like this, I don't even want to say when you're losing. Actually, what gets to me the most specifically is losing hands or losing situations in which I disagree with their strategy. So I think that's where like the biggest sort of like emotional triggers will come from. Not so much just like losing in a generic sense, like, being stuck on the session or whatever. That very rarely gets to me. But I think what's difficult is when like I understand a spot a certain way, I understand the merits of playing it a certain way, I see like a different strategy being used by my opponent, which I disagree with, and then like that leads to them winning, right? Like there's a connection. And I think it's, so it's simultaneously this feeling of like, they don't deserve to win that hand, but also like maybe a bit of doubt that says like, maybe I'm wrong about this strategy, right? So that's like a pretty nasty combination. I think like the combination of like, I've lost to what I previously thought was like an inferior strategy, but now also I'm not sure if I'm good. Like now I'm also starting to like question if I believe what I was saying in the first place, which is that like I'm the better player or like I have the better strategy. That's sort of I would say that's like the progression of thought that leads to sort of like, I don't know that it really leads. I mean, that's just kind of where it stops, I guess. I don't know that it leads to anything in particular, but that's where the source of frustration is for sure.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, one very visceral memory came to my mind. this was years back, but I was playing on one of those silly Asian apps, and it was just a fish pond. I mean, it was a table full of like 70/4s, and I played every day. I was like grinding hard, and they were beating the shit out of me every single day. And like, I kept telling myself, I don't know what's happening, but this is not right. Like, eventually you're going to win. And then like 3 weeks of losing, I would have like existential crisis. Like, I'm like taking a shower at night. Like, what the fuck is wrong with me? Like, did I get lucky in poker for like over a decade? Did I forget like everything I knew? Like, have I been wrong about all the theory and the strategy? And then it was like a full week of like existential melting down. And then one day, because like, again, this is arrogance, this is the hubris I was warning everybody about before, I decided, well, fuck it. I'm going to look at my database and see what's happening. Pull up my database. In 5 minutes, I realized, oh, they're super using. Like, it was like, oh, I'm getting scammed. This makes so much more sense to me now. It was almost like a relief that I was getting scammed. Like, oh, thank God.
I was gonna say, you're describing a game that I staked someone for, I think, and like he was getting cheated. So I hope I hope you found out that you were too. Yeah.
Yeah. If it was on an app called High Poker, then they were getting cheated.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yep, there you go. So I ran the aliases, and I was like, oh, these guys are winning at like 100 BBs per 100, and they only play 900 hands. And then I grouped them all together, and I was like, oh, they're 1 digit away from each other. I see what's going on. But yeah, it was like just super meltdown of like, what the fuck is happening? Like, I don't understand this. But yeah, just when it's legitimate, it's even more concerning because like, you know, when you're actually doubt, you know, that like, but the thing about poker is like, it's such a big game and variance is so huge. And like, even if your strategy is superior, right? Like, how superior is it? And then how many samples do you really get over the course of like your lifetime against this player? And the answer is probably not enough to really prove definitively one way or the other. So like, yeah, it's almost like it's a human thing. I think it's a human biology thing more than it is like a poker thing.
Yeah. I have seen this in like a number of different forums with either my own play or with my students. And, you know, it's sort of like, there's a pretty big disconnect between like how we feel about how well we're playing and how large our edge is in just mathematical terms. Right.
Yep.
And there's like, it's very challenging even for me to like separate that emotional feeling of like, oh, I'm theoretically better, or like I understand the game better, therefore I win. And I play this style, it has these mechanics to it. They play this other style, it has these mechanics to it. Bash those two styles against each other, and like this much EV gets sent in this direction. Like, because that's really what it is. Like we have this like romantic version of the game in our mind, and it's not grounded in expected value. It's not grounded in like math. It's just how we feel about, you know, how good we think we are.
Let me ask
how
you
we
something.
feel they are.
Yeah. So this is like a thing that I've been investigating a ton lately. I've been trying to come up with a metaphor for like how I view poker. You know, what you said is like exactly how I view poker, right? Like you've got one set strategy, one strategic model over here, one strategic model over here. You smash them against each other for 50,000 hands or however many hands. And like one will win more money than the other, right? And like people don't see poker that way. And I've been trying to come up with like a good metaphor. And I was just wondering if you have come up with a good metaphor to be able to like describe the way that we see poker to the listener.
Well, I mean, yeah, hopefully something comes. I mean, the way that I'm describing like the reality of poker is just the way that like a solver works, right? Like the reality of poker is you take two strategies and you iterate them against each other like over the true long run, and just it spits out a number and it just tells you which one is doing better for whatever reason. Yeah, I mean, the way that we actually think about poker is very qualitative. Yeah, I mean, it's rooted in storytelling, right? Like it's very much like we create a narrative and we use heuristics that other people have maybe told us at some random point. But
Yes.
Like we don't even know I don't know. Oftentimes like a heuristic comes to mind and I'm like, who said that? And like, why do I even think it's true? But yeah, I mean, the computer knows better, right? Like the computer knows nothing in terms of like language or narrative or stories. And it just understands like what wins money. It just knows the rules. So,
right. Like students will just ask me sometime, or like people in my community, students, customers will be like, why does it want to do this? Why does the solver want to do this? And I'm like, so because it does, I guess, is the first answer. But secondarily, like, you know, is it because the player is like raising, like, you know, they want to create this narrative that helps make sense of this output, but like there's no narrative there. Like there's no, we're not provided as coaches with like the exact why the solver is doing all the things. We can extrapolate, we can hypothesize, we can theorize to make sense of it ourselves. But like the reality is like all of those narratives and the heuristics are developed by human beings, because the reality is like poker is just pure soup and math and like all of these crazy different little things that like are very hard for us to make sense of.
Yeah. I find that coming up a lot in my coaching sessions as well. And oftentimes I'm just trying to do better than the previous time I tried at describing what's going, like, because it's like you said, like the solver didn't tell me, like it didn't whisper in my ear, like, hey, the reason that I'm raising 4% of the time with this combo is, you know, he was eating his Oreo funny. Like that's not how it works. So
exactly.
I mean, it's difficult to separate the human element and the mathematics of the game. I don't always try to, like, I do still try to explain things in like a human way, or like make sense of structure in a human way, because I do think that there's like understandable generalizations that you can make about solver output or about like the mechanics of the math of the game, but it's a little more mathematical than, you know, the previous generation of poker strategy, right? Like there's a little more of just, oh yeah, the solver does this because like it's worried about this counter that never happens, or it's worried, or it's iterated.
Solver's not worried, Kevin.
Yeah, but
solvers don't worry.
So you caught me there doing the human thing, but it kind of works, right? Like something that comes to mind is I was studying tournament final table, and if you look at tournament final table preflop solutions, the output doesn't open limp, or it very, very rarely chooses to open limp. But there are players at the highest stakes online right now who are open limping at final tables. So the question comes up like, okay, are they just bad?
Firstly, no.
No, the answer is no.
Yeah.
So why did they think that limping is good when the solver disagrees? So I think there's like two possibilities there. I think they either don't agree with like the fact that the solver output it means it's the best play. So I mean, like the fact that there's no limping in the solution, they might not agree with the solution. That's one possibility.
Doubtful.
And then the other possibility is they've forced the limping strategy in a closed solver environment, and they've seen the response, and they think that the response that actual humans take is very different from the response that the solver takes.
Yep. Bingo.
And I think that's almost certainly what happened, right? So it's an exploitative tactic, right? But the funny thing is, like, a lot of this stuff gets iterated out in the solution because it went through the process of trying limping, and then the counter was really good. So then it dismissed it.
Yeah, but nobody knows the counter because nobody limps.
But that's not in the, right. So like, that's not in the output. Like the output doesn't tell you like, hey, by the way, like 2 million iterations ago, I was limping, but it didn't work out. And here's what happened. Like the solver's not speaking to you. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like a bunch of players who are kind of that mindset of exploitative tactic, strategy building, they just go and like, they try stuff. Like they are the solver. Like they're doing what the solver did, and like not dismissing the idea that it might still be best in the current game environment. So yeah, this is just like, it's just what came to mind with like the sort of like human elements that are lost when you just look at the like final solution. But they're still, I think, really important. Like they're still extremely relevant to high level strategy.
Oh, like 1,000%. And yeah, to dive a little deeper into this and sort of explain it to the listener even more is like, I did something that I was just purely exploring curiosity because I was curious as to what happened if I like never raised preflop. Okay, so that was the premise of my thing. I'm never raising, I'm never 3-betting, I'm never 4-betting. And in my silly little brain, I thought, it's kind of weird because like I always have like over pairs advantage. Like my range is just so weird pre-flop that like I wonder how people are going to respond. And what I noticed was, especially limping from like under the gun, I would have regs like 6xing it from the cutoff with like king 10 off. And I'm like, I don't think that's good. Like if I were to open from under the gun, they would fold for 2.5 BBs, king 10 off. And yet now I limp with the same exact range. Nothing's changed other than I'm not raising any of it. It's the same range. Now they're willing to put 6 big blinds in from the cutoff with the same hand they would have folded. And that was like, oh, I kind of see like basically regs know what to do versus a 2.5 UTG open. They don't really know what to do when a good player limps from under the gun. They don't know the response. And when they don't know the response, like even if the limping strategy performs worse in like iteration number 1,000 against the computer, well, it's going to perform better against a human that has no earthly idea and they're just kind of clicking buttons. And that to me is like, that was sort of an eye-opening experience of like, yeah, sometimes you can give up a little bit of edge at some point when players don't know what on God's earth is happening and they've got to just like try to figure it out. And if you know what like the solver response looks like, and you can't imagine a world where a human being is going to respond in such a way, there might be an opportunity to find an edge there. So yeah, it's and that to me is like, at this stage of the game, 17 years in, all of that stuff is like, that's the fun part of poker for me. That's like exploring, being curious, taking risk, and like just trying stuff out just to see like what happens. And I think those experiments to me are like really what keeps poker fresh. Especially after all this time.
Yeah, totally agree.
What's a purchase you've made in the last year that's been impactful to your poker game?
I'm going to shy away from saying my monitor.
Monitors and computers are like the number one answers.
Yeah, that feels like a cop out. I mean, I've purchased a lot of training tools. I always purchase a lot of training tools, even if I don't use them very much. I find, well, it's just helpful to know what's on the market and how to use it and what other people are doing with it. Wondering if I can think of just like the best one that I mean, more recently, I guess, was just upgrading to PIO 2, which has been really valuable. But PIO was already very valuable. I think like, I mean, I'll just generalize a bit, right? Like my kind of like investment in new tools or like new training material, I think just like continues to pay off, because what it lets me do is for like the coaching side, it lets me first of all like relate with all the players who are coming up through like different learning paths and like understand sort of the process they're going through and maybe the pitfalls that they might run into, or maybe like the strengths of that particular method. So something that comes to mind is like all the different trainer tools that are on the market, like Lucid GTO, and there's, PIO 2 has a built-in trainer, and like Vision for PLO on Run It Once, like all these sort of interactive solvers. And like, I don't want to say that my personal game has like skyrocketed because of using trainers, but like my understanding of how to improve at the game has skyrocketed because of trainers. And then there's like the value of, just like there's, really powerful aggregated work that PIO 2 can handle. It's a lot better at, or at least I find the interface is a lot better for like scripting and for large.
You're gonna have to explain these words, Kevin.
So the aggregated work that I do on PioSolver is like, essentially I'm running a lot of different flop scenarios, a lot of different like sims, individual sims, but I'm taking like the same parameters and just doing it for the whole group. So I'm trying to get like sort of generalized information that maybe tells me, okay, what continuation bet size should I be using from under the gun against the big blind on all the different flops? What continuation bet size should I be using from the button against the big blind on all the different flops? And how's that, how do those relate? Like, how are those different from each other? What's the same? And then I'll look at like, using six max as an example or cash games as an example, looking at all the different positional formations, all the different, single raise pot, 3-bet pot, 4-bet pot, basically like trying to use a solver to teach me the entire game from scratch is sort of how I frame it for the people who I work with aggregated data on. Is like, if I was learning six max for the first time today, I would just like study some pre-flop charts, plug it into a bunch of aggregated data reports for all flops, all turns, and just have a solver tell me like, hey, here's how you play flops and turns, like in a very broad sense. So I use that just a ton. I mean, pretty much nonstop this whole year. I've been updating reports, tweaking variables, changing my scripts, kind of like updating that, and then just extracting the data so that I get, more and more broad information on all the games that I'm trying to be really good at about, heads up cash for six max cash for tournament. That's just, it's a lot of work for myself, but I guess I couldn't be doing that without just like how good the tools are.
Cool.
PioSolver being kind of the main one.
Yeah. PioSolver. Everybody loves Pio, but nobody knows how to say it, whether it's Pio or Pio.
I just switch like every third time that I say it, just to make sure I'm being inclusive. Yeah.
Like you can't be wrong if you switch it every third time.
I haven't taken a hard stance. Yeah.
All right. So a couple more questions, man. We'll wrap up and then we'll have you back on in the relatively near future. Hopefully not a pandemic in between this episode and the next episode.
Be great. Yeah.
Have you ever strongly believed something about poker over the course of your career only to change your mind later on? And if so, what led to that change of belief?
Deciding if I should give you the strategic answer or like the big picture answer.
Just give me both. I'm greedy.
Yeah. I mean, something that comes to mind that's like maybe a bigger conversation is I used to very strongly believe that poker was a meritocracy. So like that poker, like the industry itself was like this sort of fundamentally great, like stripped down version of capitalism where like you just, you put in the work and you just rise your way from like zero to whatever it is that you deserve.
Mm-hmm.
And like the good players get the money and the bad players lose the money, and that's the way it should be. And like, that's just, I just think that's not true. Now, I'm not sure exactly what changed my mind on that. Like, it's probably a gradual thing, just like more understanding of like social structures and more understanding of like, I don't know, a very basic example is just like the private game environment compared to the public game environment. But then like, taking in social considerations, like having a starting bankroll and being able to drop everything to pursue poker, and just having a lot of like startup privilege that lets you kind of move your way up the ranks, and then also being able to continue to take risk over and over and over again so you can stay up the ranks. Like better understanding of that has developed like just as I got older, I suppose.
One could make the argument though that like being able to take the time to invest into poker is like part of the meritocracy, right? Because like
that's what I mean. Yeah, it's like, it's a huge privilege to just be, like I mentioned at the beginning of the pod, right? Like I go to university that like, my parents supported and funded, and spend most of my time there just like learning how to be good at poker, essentially. So like I had like 4 years set aside to just like train, like no risk, no downside, basically. Who gets that, right? Like very, very select group of people get that starting point, and that
it's lucky.
The rest is almost just like, yeah, I mean, you know, you have to be smart and work hard or whatever, but like you don't even get in the door if you don't have kind of all that freedom.
Yeah, which
That's
means
like
it's
tough.
like young people. It's a young person's game, really.
Yeah, definitely. It's like a young privileged person's game, but it's, yeah, like very, it's tough, I guess, for me to like change my mind from like, oh, like poker is great to poker is great, but could do a lot better. I think that's like, I think that's where I'm at now. Like, I don't think that this is like, I don't think it strips away like the cool process of being able to build like 0 to whatever, like sky's the limit sort of thing. But it also, yeah, just like allows me to reflect more on maybe how to help like promote ways for other types of like stories in poker, like other types of pathways, rather than just that, like the one that I did, right?
Anything come to
probably
mind?
that both of us did.
Any ideas you got circulating? Because if you think about this, you're going to have ideas.
Yes. Well, not really my own. I mean, I pay attention to like, you know, there's actually spoke with a couple people earlier in the year about like different diversity projects that already exist in poker that I think are pretty great. There's like a women's led organization. I think it's Poker Power or Power Poker.
Power. Yeah.
Power. Yeah,
Poker
you're familiar.
Power.
Yeah, they do like, you know, they use poker as like a platform for teaching like life skills essentially. So like the end goal isn't just like bankroll growth, right? Like, which I think is a really smart way to take poker and like extend it to people who don't necessarily have like the freedom or the path to just be a monetary pursuit. So I think that's like a really clever way to reach out, first of all, to women who are just like not a big part of the industry, but then also to think about success in a different way, like to think about success in poker in a different way, which I think is like a key variable there in terms of making it more accessible to like a broader demographic.
Yeah, it's something that like you would have to experience to sort of understand the downstream benefits of poker, like in career, business, and life. But I mean, there are certainly like so many life lessons, so many business lessons, so many things that you can learn from this game. It really is a great teacher. And I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be like the end all be all. You know, you don't have to like go pro. You can just use it to learn lessons and grow and, you know, develop as a human being. You know, you mentioned like the privilege of being young and spending all the time learning poker. It made me think of, I believe it's Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, where he talked about hockey in Canada. And it was a story that he's like, basically, he recognized there was a common denominator as to the hockey players that would end up going pro or competing at a very high level. And the common denominator ended up being, like, hilariously enough, what month you were born in. Because at 6 years old, the difference between like somebody that just turned 6 and somebody that's about to turn 7 is massive. It's a big difference. They're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger that 1 year. And like the bigger, stronger, faster kid, well, they get in the higher level groups, which means they get better coaching, which means they get better access, which means they rise to the top. And then the people who were born earlier kind of fall through the cracks. Like they have to be exceptional to rise up if you're younger than the other kids. And like that to me, it just kind of like struck a chord when you were talking about poker and the path and all of that of like, yeah, it could just be as arbitrary as like what month you're born in or like what's going on in your life that allows you to pursue this thing with no restrictions. And yeah, there's a lot of that come into play as it relates to, you know, being a professional poker player. Like if I would have had responsibilities as a 20-year-old person, no chance. I would not have been able to pursue poker in the way that I did. Or if I had any passion about anything else in the world, then I probably wouldn't have been able to pursue poker. But like I didn't, and I was trying to find my way, and I was just like, maybe not like you, because I think if my parents would have told me not to do it, I think I would have just said, go fuck yourselves. Like, I'm doing it anyway. Doesn't matter like what anybody tells me. But that's just kind of my rebellious nature bubbling up to the surface. But yeah, I mean, at least at 19, I was an idiot, stupid, arrogant, all the dumb young person things. But I did know fundamentally that like I can save up some money and lose it all, and it's not that big of a deal. Like I can just start over and rebuild. And I think there's a lot of freedom and power that comes with that. Of like, yeah, I'm not afraid to fail because like I don't have very much anyway, and I could just make it all back by going to work at Applebee's or wherever again for another couple months. Anyway, all right, we'll segue on beyond that. And final two questions. Mr. Rabichow, do you have any projects you're working on that are near and dear to your heart?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess we talked before the pod started, like about the group coaching project I've been doing with Run It Once. There have been like a couple different coaching projects that I've, half started or gotten into, but that's the one that's like in full swing, and I'm really happy about the basic idea. And I've seen a lot of I don't know, either maybe I just haven't been looking for it previously, but a lot of other training sites are producing similar environments, which is this like group learning environment where seminars are live. You have some sort of like path from A to B where you take in like a group of students and have objective outcomes for the end of that path. And that's just like
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Linear learning paths. Wow, you don't just have to like figure shit out all on your own.
Yeah, like there's very much, I mean, I think that Run It Once has fantastic content on their video platform, right? But that's what it is. It's a video platform. And I think what we're trying to address, and like this was basically like I felt really strongly that we could just be teaching more directly or more effectively. And this is sort of like the project that came out of trying to bridge the gap, where like you have some really smart people who are just aimlessly consuming everything.
Yep.
And they don't necessarily know how to like internalize it and apply it to themselves wherever they're at today, and like take them to the version of themselves that they need to or they aspire to. So that project, we just finished the first like official group. We did a test group back in November. So having done it twice, it's it's growing rapidly. We had really strong interest just out of the gate, which I was excited about. But at the moment, I'm the only coach who's doing it. I am hoping, if this continues to be like, a mainstay project on Run It Once, I'm hoping like other coaches will lead other groups with different focuses, different games. Ideally, to me, this is just like almost its own like training environment that directly sort of progresses people towards progress or towards success, rather than sort of indirectly giving them the tools to have success, which would be like the videos.
Right. Like I think of like the videos as it's like you've got 5,000 books to learn poker in a library, and every day you walk in and you read like 3 pages in one book, and then you put it back on the shelf, and then you just take another book out the next day and read 3 more pages. And like that isn't going to get the job done, that sort of scattershot, shotgun approach. That's really the way that I've approached it too. And like it's difficult to dial yourself back, because like you want to give more, but like you also don't want to like bury people either with information so that they get confused and lost and all the stuff. And so like everything that I've made as well is like targeted at one thing, and we're going to get really good at this one thing, and then we're going to move on to the next thing, which is like really the only rational way that I think poker can be taught, is like teach this one thing, move on to the next thing, move on to the next thing. And like the interactive element, like you said, I know pokercoaching.com has like interactive webinars. And I think BBZ also has regular interactive webinars. Stuff like that I think is important too, where you have community, right? Because like you said, you've got 15 to 20 people to thank for being an influence in your poker career. I could say exactly the same. And like you need that community. You need those to have those discussions with people who are on the same path as you, who are passionate, driven, and motivated. So like all that stuff just sort of fosters that environment of community and collaboration and growth. And also like, let's get really good at one thing and then let's just move to the next thing and get really good at that instead of like getting 2% better at one thing and then 1% better at another. But then when you got 1% better at the second thing, you kind of forgot some stuff about the first thing. So now you're actually like 1% better. And then it's just diminishing returns. I just don't, to me, I don't find it super valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there's like, there's always the course format, which you see a lot of as well. I mean, Run It Once has a number of courses, and pretty much every training site, I think, has some number of those. But again, they lose that sort of like direct point of contact where someone is evaluating the viewer or the student, so to speak. I mean, I'm basically just saying like, this is one-on-one coaching, except a little more accessible and a little more affordable. And, the group environment sort of like automates a lot of the learning that would otherwise just be like dependent a bit on the coach. And I'm sure you see this as well. Like when you do a lot of one-on-ones, you want to like make your students self-sufficient so that they can like continue on with the learning process. You don't want them to like feel obligated to come to you, the mentor, for like all the answers every single time. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's also trying to establish that so that they don't like rely so much on me as a coach.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, teach them how to fish, and they fish for a lifetime. And also like, if you don't teach them how to fish as a private coach, they will badger and bug the living bejesus out of you all day long. You'll just have like endless streams of confusing messages in your inboxes across the board.
You can see there's also selfish reasons for this, as I agree. You don't.
Yeah, like I mean, I've thought about this very heavily. I see the angles, and like there's some very selfish elements to this.
Yeah,
but it's good, man. That sounds like the right path. And where could they check that out at? RunitOnce.com. Is there like a link?
I'll give you a direct link. I forget the URL, but there's now like a coaching section of the Run It Once homepage, so you can navigate to like group coaching, and there's some banners under my videos right now as well on Run It Once that link directly to that. Just Kevin Rabichow group coaching. But yeah, the Run It Once homepage has all that information.
Awesome, man. I'll put that in the show notes, and the listener can click right through if you're interested in group coaching with Mr. Rabichow. And final question, where can the Chasing Poker Greatness listener find you on the World Wide Web?
So I have a website where I have all my coaching information. That's just www.kevinrabichow.com.
That wasn't taken?
That was not taken. I know, it's amazing.
Wow.
We've actually, the Rabichow name is unique to my family, which is great. It's kind of a made up last name. So if you come across any Rabichows, they are related to me.
Yes. www.bradwilson was unfortunately like the third domain taken on the entire internet.
Yeah, you're competing with 20,000 other Brad Wilsons.
I just want to be the most famous Brad Wilson in the world. That's all I want. And like, there's like Olympian Brad Wilsons. Like, there's just these insane high performing Brad Wilsons that I'm just like, I can never overcome them. I can't even be the best one of me in the world. But yeah, anyways, I digress.
Have you tried buying the URL, like the domain name?
No, I haven't. I haven't stooped to that. I'm afraid that they'll just be like, go fuck yourself, inferior Brad Wilson, and that'll be the end of it.
So yeah, that's I have all my coaching information there. I'm also on Twitter at KRabichow, and still making videos with Run It Once.
Awesome, man. It's been a pleasure having you back on the show. Thank you for your time and your energy once again. We'll have you back, and take care, brother.
Thanks, Brad. Looking forward to it. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Chasing Poker Greatness. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. Go to chasingpokergreatness.com to get the newsletter, join the Greatness Village community, book a coaching session, or dive into the latest data-driven poker courses. Follow the show on Twitter at CPG Podcast.